Hello, I hope you're having a great day. I thought it was a great time to come on here and show some records that I've got because I did a little record shopping trip a couple of weeks ago and got some really great stuff, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about some pickups that I haven't got necessarily that recently, but are just really exciting ones that I've got over the last 1 or 2 years or so. So I went to the vintage market in Brick Lane and had a little fish around in there. So there's a really lovely record kiosk down there. I had a look up on where they've got all the records displayed up around the edge of the shop and saw this. This was only £15 and I just thought it's quite a good album. Why not? It's one that is quite a memorable one from my childhood. It came out in 2006 and it is the Scissor Sisters. Ta-da! So I was quite excited for the album at the time because it had one of the songs in it was used in Doctor Who, which kind of added quite a lot of appeal to it for me at the time. But I thought, £15, that's not a bad price. And I really listened to it, threw it on the turntable, and it's actually a lot better than what I remembered. It's a bit of a mixed bag. It has got a few ones that let it down a little bit, but the songs that are strong are so strong, it's unbelievable. They're that good. Got a really nice image on the gatefold there. There are just so many great songs. I don't know if I like this one or the Scissor Sisters' first album more, though currently I'm really into this one. So you've got Don't Feel Like Dancing, which is their most popular song, but I really love I Can't Decide and She's My Man. Land of a Thousand Words is a really, really good ballad off of this album, sort of like the Mary of this album, but I think it's a fantastic song. But there are a couple of chord changes in there that don't quite sit right with me, where it's like a descending chord progression but it goes down to a major and not a minor, and it just doesn't quite do it for me. And there's also like a plucked guitar arpeggio which is like totally clashes with the key of the song, but apart from that it is a fantastic tune. Intermission is brilliant. Love Intermission. It actually has Elton John playing the piano on it. There's a few like celebrity appearances on this record. Kiss You Off is good. The Other Side and Might Tell You Tonight are very, very good tunes as well. So it's a fantastic album. I don't know if maybe you could condense it into a single album just by having the really, really solid tracks, but it's still a brilliant record. Funnily enough, my favourite part of the song Don't Feel Like Dancing is the intro, and if it's got such a lovely chord progression that it's just so satisfying if you listen to that, and then it kind of turns into Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel from that point onwards. Yeah, I'm really glad I got it. I really do like it a lot. I genuinely have enjoyed it so much over the last couple of weeks, and it is better than what I remembered. I got this record in Reckless Records in Soho, which is one of the sort of well-known independent record shops in London, and this is Love Song by Simple Minds. So I basically got this because it's like a really well-known sample. There's this electronic texture at the beginning of it which is really gritty and sonically satisfying, and it's been sampled quite a lot. I actually spoke quite a lot about it in my 10 albums that influenced me video, where Blur sampled it in the song Battle, Aphex Twin has sampled it, I've sampled it on the Anemone Symphony track, and it's just a great texture. So I thought, why not have it on vinyl? And the actual song itself is pretty good, and the B-side. But I just love the artwork, really. It's this really cool like Speedway type themed thing. Pleased I got it. It's nice to have the odd 12-inch single in your collection. But yeah, the texture that I'm talking about is from the 80s, but it sounds more 90s in tone, if that makes sense. I'm pretty sure that they sampled it and chopped it up as the main hook on Breathe by The Prodigy. It's just a super distinctive sound. So out of that shop I also got a Mike Oldfield box set. So this has got his first 3 albums and a disc of collaborative efforts. But Mike Oldfield is just super lovely music to listen to. It's just really earthy music that you can get really lost in, and it evokes images of big, huge landscapes. It's just the ultimate music to put on to relax to. And for £4 for probably his best work, Omadon and Tubular Bells, and 2 other records, I thought was a pretty amazing deal, to be fair. And it's all in it's kind of beat up condition, but pretty good for £4, I think. And it comes with a lovely little booklet that talks all about all the albums, etc. So the next few records are ones that I kind of pinched out of my mum's collection. So she's got quite a extensive collection that's all stored in boxes, but there's a lot of 80s stuff in there that I haven't really got into, but I've pinched a few records out of there that are ones that I really like. So first is 80s Access. So this is a really fantastic little compilation. There's so many great hits on here, so it's just great to sort of have some fantastic, well-known late 70s and 80s tracks, all just thrown into one vinyl album. So you've got like Only You by Yazoo and Small Town Boy Bronski Beat, Golden Brown by The Stranglers, Cars by Gary Newman, Vienna by Ultravox. I think the second side resonates with me a great deal more than the first side. But apart from anything else, I just really like the artwork. It's just really sort of typical like late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, it's a great record just to put on, just some really classic hits. I also picked out an old copy of Black Celebration by Depeche Mode. This is a kind of, I think this is an 80s masterpiece, to be fair. It's one of their best albums. It's maybe top 3 for them. So this is kind of where they transitioned from a kind of boy band type thing into their more dark, more dramatic sound, which of course came to stuff like Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion and stuff like that. I think it's one of their best albums. Martin Gore does a lot of singing on here, and a particular favourite is a song called Question of Lust. I'm really into that one at the moment. He has quite a similar tone to Dave Gahan, I think. If I didn't know, I might have thought it was him singing, just sort of in a slightly different sort of register. There was also a 12-inch single for Personal Jesus. This is such a cool song. The production is just so cool and tight and sort of advanced for the time. If you compare the production of something like this to a lot of other pop music from the late 80s and early 90s, it just seems really advanced and futuristic and forward thinking. You've got a bit of a naughty photo on the back there. There's quite a cool B-side called Dangerous, and an acoustic version of Personal Jesus. It's nice just to have something like this, which is an actual record from back in the day and in such sort of preserved, good condition. And there's a really lovely copy of Lou Reed's Transformer. Not an original, it's a 80s copy, I think, but it sounds really good. It sounds really like analogy, if that makes sense. Everything just sounds really warm and everything's got a bit of crackle on it, but it's quite a nice, rich sound for this album. You can just listen to Perfect Day and just melt, because it's like the greatest song ever made. And of course, you know, Satellite of Love and Walk on the Wild Side are masterpieces as well. With David Bowie doing all the production and all the backing vocals, it's just like so masterfully executed. And I love how weird the lyrics are on a record like this. I love Andy's chest and makeup, just for how almost surreal the lyrics are. There was also a copy of The Story So Far by Kate Bush. I do like Kate Bush, but I do struggle to get into some of her albums because they're a little bit peculiar for my taste. But I like the really commercial stuff, like The Kick Inside and, you know, Hounds of Love. But this is just kind of a really nice sort of entry way into Kate Bush, because it's sort of cherry-picked some of her finest songs, and it really is just, you know, masterpiece after masterpiece of classic songwriting. Of course, got Running Up That Hill, which is being used in Stranger Things, which I'm halfway through at the moment. But yeah, it's just superb songwriting, but also executed in such a fantastic way. And it'd be brilliant to get some actual Kate Bush albums into my collection. The next one is Hail to the Thief by Radiohead. This is probably my favourite Radiohead album cover. I've always loved how spooky it is, but also colourful. And, you know, it's not one of their most highly regarded albums, but it's still a fantastic record, even in its own right. It's like one of their lesser albums, but it's still brilliant. So yeah, interestingly, this runs at 45 RPM, similar to the Amnesiac reissue that I've got. Still just got fantastic songs on it. Maybe a little. I think the only complaint that fans and the band themselves have about this album is that it's slightly too long. It's got about 14 songs, and you could have cut that down to 10 or 11. But apart from that, it's just another fantastic Radiohead effort. I think they made this one quite spontaneously, because the two before were done over a very long period of time, and this one was just kind of sort of bashed out and done more as a band. But, you know, 2 + 2 = 5, Sail to the Moon. A particular favourite is Where I End You Begin. That one's got a really eerie kind of atmosphere to it. And of course, Wolf at the Door, you know, Scatterbrain. So many good songs. Radiohead, just one of those bands that are a lot of fun to collect on vinyl. Next up, we've got The Cure, Disintegration. There's not much I can really say about this album that hasn't been said before. It's just like one of the most emotionally dense records ever, and it is just so good. I really love the image on the gatefold. I'd never seen that before. Yeah, this is just like a 2010 reissue, at least that's what it says on the back, remastered by Robert Smith himself. Interestingly, this record is kind of famously just like one of the longest like popular albums ever, you know, with 9-minute songs and things like that. But unbelievably, when this came out in the 80s, it was on a single album. So it's like this album's like an hour long and it came out on one disc, so it always sort of should have been a double album. But originally you didn't have the song Homesick, which for me is quite an important song. You know, I think that Untitled would be too coming too soon without it. I can't imagine the song Disintegration being that close to the end of the album. Every song on here is beautiful. You know, I particularly love Same Deep Water as You, and of course Disintegration. Lullaby is one of the coolest singles ever. Plain Song, you know, it is just a total masterpiece of an album. This one's a little bit peculiar. I've got Tom Waits Swordfish trombones. I guess Tom Waits is quite an acquired taste. You might not necessarily get into it straight away. He's of course famous for his like really gravelly, growly kind of voice, and this is definitely one of his best albums. You know, it's an acquired taste, but when you do get into it, it is actually genius. It's genuinely one of the best albums ever. I like how this is a reissue, but it's got like a really old they've kept like the really old labels that it would have had originally. But yeah, if you want any idea, it's sort of experimental rock, but it's kind of as weird as the album cover. But yeah, I've just been really super into this one lately. Personal favourite at the moment is the track Down Down Down. That is a fantastic song, written and produced by Tom Waits. It'd be great to get Rain Dogs as well. That's his other kind of magnum opus record. Everything about this is perfect. Perfect album, perfect sounding record. I think I got this out of W.H. Smith's. Okay, next up I've got a 90s alternative classic, Souvlaki by Slowdive. I actually, this kind of resonates with me a little bit more than My Bloody Valentine Loveless. The songwriting just appeals to me a little bit more. There's quite a cool documentary that they made in more recent times talking about this album. Some of these songs came from a real sort of place of misery, and were quite linked to the fact that two of the band members finished a relationship, and the songs are kind of dealing with that. But I love the way the guitars sound. It's just so you know, how can I describe it? It's like The Cure, but with like 10 times more reverb. It's just a fantastic sound. I suppose a real classic track from this album would be When the Sun Hits. That's a real brilliant shoegaze track, but the whole thing's great. It's just great to relax to. It's really good songwriting. Even Brian Eno kind of contributed some production to this album, released on Creation Records. And you know, I don't think the band did super well at the time. It's one of those bands that have sort of got more and more of a cult following as the years have gone on, and now they're quite popular. But at the time it was sort of a failure. A lot of the songs have got quite a angsty sort of feel, you know, and you can just get lost in this real sort of shoegazy haze that this record creates. I think 40 Days is another favourite. Sing is a really cool track as well. And it's interesting, the lead singer Neil and Rachel, they've got kind of voices that are very different, but they sing at the same time over the top of each other, so you have this cool balance of male and female vocals. So next up, another album which I guess is kind of in the same vein as Souvlaki, you know, it's that same sort of dream pop sound but something a bit more modern. We've got Depression Cherry by Beach House. Beach House are absolutely one of my favourite bands of the last 10 years. I was privileged enough to go and see them at Brixton the other week, and it was a fantastic show, and it kind of gave me chills to actually see them in the flesh playing these songs. So but yeah, this was maybe their 5th or 6th album, maybe, or yeah, I think the 5th, because they had Teen Dream and Bloom, which were like their commercial breakthrough records, and they're kind of like the group's like magnum opus albums, and they're really kind of extroverted, ecstatic, sunny pop music, but with, you know, that real dream pop sound. But then you enter into Depression Cherry, which was the follow-up to Bloom a couple of years later, and it's far more I'm not sure what they were kind of trying to do with their sound. It's slightly more understated and rainy, if I can describe it that way. It's still a top album. I absolutely totally enjoy it from beginning to end. I just love their sound. Whatever it is that they do, it just totally resonates with me. Their most popular song is Space Song, which is probably is definitely a personal favourite for me. They're one of those bands where the most popular song is also, without a doubt, one of the best songs. But you've got, I really love Wildflower. That's a beautiful ballad. It sort of reminds me a little bit of Yes, I'm Changing by Tame Impala, which came out the same year as this. It's interesting. The cover has got this unusual sort of velvety texture. It's sort of flocked, and all of the text is kind of like spray painted on, but it's all kind of fading a bit. But yeah, I was glad to get it. It's quite an expensive record for some reason. It's like 30 quid everywhere you look. I think I got this off of Juno Records. Okay, so I've got a few hip hop albums next. First off, I've got The Impossible Kid by Aesop Rock. Aesop Rock may be a bit of an acquired taste, I would say, but it's really interesting music to get into. He just raps about such unusual topics, and the production on here is absolutely top. I really, really love it. And this is just one of the best vinyl packages I've got in my collection, really. So you've got the album cover, but then there's a much larger poster which comes out, and this is like part of it, and it contributes to the album cover. Some of my favourite coloured vinyl that I've got in my whole collection. Yeah, it's quite an insane colour. Yeah, it's quite an unusual album. I think Aesop Rock has got like the highest word count of any rapper. You know, there's a song where he sings about his cat on here. My favourite song is probably Blood Sandwich. That's a very interesting one. It's got some fantastic synth arpeggios in it and some great hip-hop production. I also got Deltron 3030. I bought this one because it has a lot of the same staff as the Gorillaz self-titled album. So you've got Dan the Automator producing, and then of course you've got Del the Funky Homo Sapien and Kid Koala on turntables, which is the cast for a lot of the cast for the first Gorillaz album, which is one of my all-time favourites. So I've listened to it all the way through about 4 times and just totally enjoyed it every time. It's just a really good classic hip-hop record. If you're going to listen to a hip-hop album, this is an absolutely fantastic one to go for. It's got a real sort of sci-fi vibe. It's a kind of dystopian concept record, but I really like the sci-fi themed labels that are on the record. You know, I like rap music that has a slightly unusual concept. You know, I like rap music that's more sort of conceptual and fictional. And Damon Albarn himself makes a few appearances on there, which was sort of how I was introduced to it in the first place. And now another record sort of in the same vein, but probably more of a recognised classic. We've got Mad Villain. This is just such a bizarre, unusual, fascinating record. It's just one of those sort of classic, you know, must-have vinyl ones. Someone showed me recently the recording setup that Madlib, the producer, had for this album. It's really interesting. He had quite an inexpensive sampler hooked up to a really lo-fi, almost like a toy record player, which he was using to produce the album and get all the samples from, which I really wouldn't have thought. I would have thought this would have been done on more, you know, established equipment. But yeah, I mean, what can you say about this record? It's just one of the most acclaimed albums ever. Yeah, I need to give this another spin. I haven't listened to it in a little while. Okay, next up, this one was a really good deal because it cost next to no money, but it is a true classic. Night at the Opera by Queen. So I think this is a first pressing, because I've heard that the first pressing in the UK had the corner cut out of the inner sleeve, which this one does have. But this only cost like 50p, and it's like 50p for this absolute classic album. It's like, I don't know anyone that would sort of pass that up. Even the record's in quite decent condition, really. You could probably sell it for quite a lot more than that on Discogs, and it plays through pretty well. It's, you know, as you might expect, it's got quite a bit of crackle on it, but you know, it's not a bad record at all. You know, I'm a bit mixed on this album, really. It's sort of Queen's like magnum opus album to a lot of people, but there are definitely some very like dodgy songs on it, in my opinion. It's like I'm in Love with My Car is fucking shit. Like, I really don't like it. It's just a total rubbish song. This album could definitely do without it. It more than makes up out for it with songs like You're My Best Friend, 39. A personal favourite is Seaside Rendezvous. I just find that song to be so fun. I just find myself listening to that one over and over. It's like my favourite non-single Queen song. Love of My Life and Good Company, and of course Bohemian Rhapsody. But yeah, it is a really good album. There's just one or two that don't do it for me, I guess. And it has got a really lovely gatefold to it. It's brilliant when you can just find something for a very cheap price. This was another amazing deal. Michael Jackson Thriller for only 50p. And of course, you know, this is, you know, everybody knows this album. What can you even say about it? I really like the gatefold. But it's actually a really decent copy, you know. I would have paid a lot more than like 50p or £1 for it. In really good shape, you know. But I'm sort of flexing these absurdly cheap records, but they're kind of the only ones in my collection that I've been able to snag for next to no money. I mean, every song on this album is a masterpiece. But for me, personally, the last 3 tracks are like total perfection. You know, Human Nature, PYT and Lady in My Life are just like the best sequence of 3 songs on any album. I think the second side does it more for me than the first side. So this next one I'm really into at the moment. This is a New World record by ELO. I think if you're going to listen to any ELO album all the way through, I think this one's perfect because it's jam-packed with fantastic ideas, but it's also very consistent, you know, and concise. It's just 9 tracks and 36 minutes. It's really digestible. Of course, the Out of the Blue, the one after this, is a masterpiece as well, but I would recommend listening to this one as one to get into ELO because it's so easy to listen to and every song is fantastic. You know, I think that the classical elements to it are just genius, especially on a song like Tightrope. But yeah, the singles off this one were Living Thing and Telephone Line. I'm just absolutely in love with it at the moment. I think it's brilliant. I'd love to collect all of the classic 70s ELO albums on vinyl. And of course, you know, aesthetically, ELO aren't the coolest band in the whole world, but it doesn't matter because it's just really wholesome, high quality songwriting that I think anyone can enjoy. It's very non-offensive music. So next up, Ulrich Schnauz, A Strangely Isolated Place. I was first introduced to Ulrich Schnauz through one of my favourite documentaries, Ghosts on the Underground, and they use his track Gone Forever, which is the opener to this album, and it's just such a heavenly, euphoric, but also eerie track. If you're going to listen to any track by this guy, check out Gone Forever, Ulrich Schnauz. It's one of my favourite electronic tracks. But yeah, I got really into this guy's music. He's like a electronic producer, but it's just music that is just so soothing. So if I was to sort of sell you on it, it's sort of, his stuff is kind of a mix of like Aphex Twin, Sigur Rós, Boards of Canada, Kraftwerk, and My Bloody Valentine. You know, pretty good sort of mix of influences, but this album is just unbelievably good. It's so deep and rich and melodic. I love his debut album as well, Faraway Trains Passing By, which I've briefly touched upon on this channel before. But yeah, this comes on a double album, 2 songs per side. I'd say it's quite easy music to listen to. It's sort of kind of warm and relaxing, but it's like some of Aphex Twin stuff in the sense that it's kind of like the sort of music you might hear on a TV program, like How It's Made, almost repetitive but really melodic. And yeah, this album's got a really shoegazy sort of feel. It's not exclusively electronic. There's definitely some almost rock inspired tracks on here, but you have these really wonderful droney tracks. You know, On My Own is a really good one, for example. I think it's sort of like my stuff in the sense that I think that he sings on it, but he uses his voice in quite an abstract way, and it's quite buried in the mix. It's like one element, it's not the focal point, it's just one of many musical elements. Next up, I've got Tin Drum by Japan. I basically bought this for a track called Ghosts, and if you've never heard it, it's one of the most atmospheric songs I've ever heard. It's an all-time favourite of mine. I think they used a lot of like FM synthesis on it. It came out in 1981, I think, but it sounds like nothing else from 1981. It sounds like nothing else from now. Such an atmospheric piece of music. And this is a original pressing from back in the day. Only cost 4 or 5 quid, I think. You know, the track is really complemented on the vinyl format. Really wonderful, rich sound. Okay, next up we've got Cigarettes After Sex, the debut album. Cigarettes After Sex were kind of a band that had a few viral hits online. If you've never heard it, it's basically really, really atmospheric, chilled out pop music. A really kind of ethereal, dark vibe, but the lead singer sort of has these really interesting lyrics and tells all these different stories, and it's really got such a unique atmosphere. Yeah, sort of in the same vein as Slowdive or Beach House, but very understated and dark. Personal favourite tracks on here, I love K, I love Sunsets, that's a big favourite. Apocalypse, Flash, Sweet, that's a really good one. It's interesting how one artist can make you feel such a unique way, and this artist really does that. Okay, I found quite a nice copy of Paul Simon's Graceland for about £8. You've got a sticker on the front which I guess devalues it a little bit. It's just one of those classic albums that I didn't own. I didn't realise that Vampire Weekend sort of largely were inspired by this, particularly on like their first album. I didn't realise that sort of sound that they do had sort of been really well established on an album like this, like 20 years earlier. Okay, I got a really nice copy of Primal Scream, Screamadelica. This is a real proper sort of melting pot of different styles and ideas. Not many records out there that combine breakbeat, psychedelic, gospel, ambient. It's a real mixed up album. And it's quite nostalgic for me. I remember really getting into it when I was about 12. For whatever reason, we just really loved Primal Scream at that time. But my favourite track on here is Higher Than the Sun, which has just got this really crazy, like spacey, psychedelic production on it. And I love Inner Flight. I think that's a very beautiful song as well. Okay, next up I've got Gary Newman, The Pleasure Principle. I really love Gary Newman. He's one of my favourite people. I always find him to be a really interesting character. Gary Newman is one of the sort of people that brought synthesizers into the mainstream. He does it in a really interesting way because of course you have things like Kraftwerk which are quite exclusively electronic. You know, most of the track is all very robotic and electronically produced, but what he did was really innovative and interesting because it's like punk music but with the guitar has been replaced by a synthesizer. You know, a personal favourite is ME, and of course everybody knows Cars. Gary himself doesn't like taking a lot of credit for being this like kind of electronic innovator, because he kind of just walks into a studio hoping to do like a punk album and there just happened to be a Moog synthesizer in there and he just really liked it and went in and replaced all the tracks with a synth, and it just happened to be really, really successful with that. In the same vein as Gary Newman, another kind of synth pop thing, got Grimes with Visions. This is probably my favourite album from her in terms of being like a consistent atmosphere. You know, I think her later album Art Angels has got all of my favourite songs from her, but this is my favourite just to listen to from beginning to end. It's really, really atmospheric synth pop, and she just does such interesting things with her voice. And of course, you know, her artwork is always really fabulous to look at as well. Yeah, I particularly like the cover on this one, almost sort of abstract pop music. Next up I've got the Collapse EP by Aphex Twin. You know, quite a lot of it for me is in a similar vein to the Drug Use album, which is one of my absolute all-time favourite albums. You know, I think it's just classic Aphex Twin. But you know, I really like it because it's really fantastic, really detailed, colourful, abstract dance music. But it's just in, you know, a nice sort of digestible package. You know, this is just like a 25-minute EP. Very easy to listen to, and I love the cover. I love when he sort of does interesting things with the logo but brings something new to it. I need to spin this. I haven't listened to this in a little while. Can't really speak highly enough of it, to be honest. It only cost about tenner as well. Okay, next up I've got J Dilla with Donuts. I sort of bought it on a whim. It was only about 16 quid, and I'd heard that it was quite heavily inspired by DJ Shadow introducing, you know, one of these sort of records that's purely made out of samples. And I've really enjoyed it, listening to it. It's sort of almost like a perfect album for someone like me that has no attention span, because the songs are like 1 minute long, so it's constantly shifting and changing over its 4 sides. For me personally, it's not a perfect album. You know, some of the sound effects are sort of a bit grating for me after a little while, but I definitely enjoy the variety. You know, I love when there's kind of, it's hip hop, but it's also really abstract and messed up and choppy and that kind of thing. Next up I've got Black Sabbath, the self-titled record. I think this was like a 50th anniversary release. I think I just saw it online somewhere for quite a cheap price, maybe about £18. I've never really got super deep into Black Sabbath, but I really like I've always liked the first two albums. I've always loved how ominous and witchy the album cover was. And last but certainly not least, I've got Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. A lot of people were saying that this vinyl pressing sounded horrible. To me it sounds pretty okay, you know, it gets a bit crunchy in parts, but I always think that this record is actually, considering how popular it was, it's quite a lo-fi album. They were going for that sort of really distorted Motown kind of sound. But when you listen to it, even on streaming services, there's a lot of clipping in the mix. But I guess that's just part of its identity. It's got this really crunchy kind of sound. But yeah, it's obviously this is an absolute, you know, classic from the 2000s. Definitely one of the best albums from my childhood. But it's interesting how you can kind of emotionally respond to sounds as well as the actual musical composition. Because when I hear like the drum sound at the beginning of You Know I'm No Good, I'm kind of instantly transported back to like being a 6-year-old and hearing this album being played over and over again in my mum's BMW. You know, every song on here is amazing. You know, Back to Black, Love Is a Losing Game. One that I've been really into lately is Wake Up Alone. Yeah, of course, Rehab and You Know I'm No Good. Some really good press photography that comes with it as well. But yeah, I thought it sounded okay. I think the record gets a little bit crunchy towards the middle, but you know, this is perfectly okay copy for me.